Well, I'm going to go ahead and start with some introductory comments because that won't hurt anybody if they miss them. Get us going. So thank you for everybody for showing up, and hopefully our last couple of stragglers will be on shortly. Again, I'm Chris Parkins, manager of the Benfield office for the Department of State Lands. I feel like we all know each other now, even if virtually. So once again, welcome. Thank you for all your hard work and review and helpful comments and suggestions and input on this process. It feels good to be here at RAC number 3. And John, we do see your note about having to bail out. We understand. I think we'll have a lot of the meat before 3. So we'll do meat first and save fluff for later. With that, the plan for today is to finish where we left off in discussing co-location and fees. And I just want to remind everybody that, let's be all respectful of each other. We have differing views, but give everybody a chance to chime in. It seems to have flowed pretty well with people, raising their hand or just speaking when they realize no one else is speaking and saying their 2 cents. So I feel like we all have that, that we all recognize that, and that's not going to be an issue, but I just wanted to remind everybody of that. And the other thing with this being a Zoom meeting is the meeting is being recorded. That will help with note taking. We've done that in prior meetings, and we always announce that at the beginning. Today, especially because our note taker, Erin, who's behind the scenes again today, will have to bow a little bit early, so she'll finish her note taking based on the recording. And with that, I want to thank some of the behind the scenes DSL people too. Lonnie and Erin, you've been the grease on the wheels of this machine that keep it rolling forward for the RAC. And I want to thank Amber and Sheena for their hard work, especially between meeting 2 and 3 with the incorporating all of the input that we got at that last meeting, which Amber will be summarizing again. She did send out a pretty good email that, oh, hey, Erin is going to be, Erin will be on for the full call. So we're going to record it anyway, so she has a backup. With that, I think we should just go ahead and dive in. So for the sake of a roster and taking count, I believe the only 2 people that are not on the call yet are Chip and Lori. I will be keeping an eye out, but if anybody sees them jump on board, clue me in and I'll welcome them, but we're just going to go ahead and forge on ahead. With that, let's go to the next agenda item, which is a review of the RAC number 2 meeting. Sheena, would you lead us on that?
Out a summary to everyone of the meeting 2 minutes. Did anybody have any comments or additions or changes to that? Or managed to catch it all?
Looks like John.
So on page 4, I'm not sure I've requested anything. How about suggested?
Okay.
And other than that, I'm good. Thanks.
Take a look at. Oh, that's not it.
All right, are we ready to move on then?
Oh, so that was.
I believe that we are. So Amber, are you ready to recap us on what we came up with between meeting 2 and 3, 2 and today?
Sure. We're just making a note on John's comment on the meeting minutes. So I think we found what he's talking about on page 4. Okay. Sorry, I'm not super familiar with Zoom, so it takes me a minute to.
No problem.
So since everybody got all the attachments I sent out, we can open them if we have questions, but let's just go over basically the email I sent and where we landed with some things and some changes that we made. And this is basically just going to be a recap of the email real quick. So we're looking at the rates for government, and the majority of our leases are government leases. There's 8 or 9 of them, and 2 of them are only local government. The rest of them are state or federal. majority state, but from the feedback we were getting, it sounded like, you know, local government isn't in a place to see increased fees on lease rates. And so we wanted to keep that fair and not raise the rates for local government beyond what they're paying now with the base rate of $3,000. But looking at the rate study, which I need to remind myself of, $4,000 a year was on the low end of government and emergency services. So in keeping with that, and the rate study low was about $4,000 and the rate study high for government was about $10,000. And this is table 1, which I'll pull up because that might just be helpful. So keeping that in mind, it seemed like increasing the rates for all government outside of local government, which is defined as city or county, to $4,500 a year was reasonable with the rate study numbers that we were seeing. Let's see, do I have table 1? Okay, bear with me with the technology. Okay, so table 1. So this is where we see the rate study low and the rate study high for government. And seeing that $4,000 is the low end of what other states are charging, we thought that $4,500 as a starting rate for government outside of local government was reasonable. Are there any comments on that change so far? If you see me looking up, it's because my screen is tiny and we're in a conference room with a pretty big screen. So, okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Please, if you have questions or comments, raise the hands and we'll get you guys in order. So the next change, if there's no comments, and I don't have the chat up. Okay. Chris, can you keep an eye on the chat for us, please?
I got it.
Okay, so the next change that we made had to do with commercial uses. So we were really struggling with the definition of commercial uses. And, you know, the feedback that we got from the last meeting was that rural areas with smaller populations, you know, those commercial users aren't going to be making as much money. So based on population, it seems to be a really popular way to identify lease rates. So we took that into account and we came up with 3 categories for commercial rather than local and regional. We went with small, medium, and large. So the small commercial, it seemed like the rates that we're currently charging under in this interim time is $6,000 a year for all commercial across the board. And we had some smaller users like internet users in Harney County that really had an issue with that. And to be fair, we don't blame them. So we adjusted the rates for a small commercial entity with the definition being a product being sold in a county of less than 50,000 people in population. Their base rent would be $4,000 a year. So that
Amber?
is.
Sorry, we have John's hand up there.
Oh, no, I wouldn't have interrupted. That's why I put it that
Oh.
way. You can finish your topic and we'll come back.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll get to John. So, so in a county of less than 50,000 people, the initial base rate, so that would be considered small, would be $4,000 a year. So the next population category we came up with is populations of 50,000 to 150,000 would be considered medium. with their lease rates at $6,000 a year. And that's the rate that we're currently charging. And we are receiving rent at that rate. So we only have one medium commercial user, and the rest are considered small. So all of the commercial users that we have in Harney County would basically fit under that small rate. Some of the reasonings, we looked at different counties where we have communication sites. We have one in Douglas, well, two in Douglas. Harney County is the majority, and then I believe we have one in Josephine. And when we look at those populations, Josephine County actually was greater than 50,000. So that was a little bit surprising. Not sure if that's where Medford is or not, but and then we thought about, where we're at in Central Oregon and with all the growth, and Deschutes County, and what would we charge commercial users in Deschutes County, for example. And so we decided 150,000 was kind of an indicator that there's good economy based on the population. So that would be considered a large commercial with a base rate of $8,000 a year. So John, what do we got today?
I will try not to put 3 hours and 30 minutes of comments within 90 minutes of my attending time. But
Okay.
I am confused by the and emergent. So I assume we're talking about the compensation section, which is 141.126.0150.
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm confused by the definition of and emergency services in two different locations.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I had that same thought. So basically, it's like local government, let's use Harding County, for example. So Harney County has a 911 service, so that would still be considered local government and emergency services. But state government, like state police, that would be considered an emergency services, but it would still fit under that larger government category. Does that make sense?
It does. Are there emergency services outside of the OPB's alert system? Are there other emergency services that are not provided by local or state governments?
The FirstNet is something that's up and coming. Other than that, it's wildfire communications. That would
So
be under.
which
things like
one would
that.
they qualify as? If that's what my confusion is we have local or county government and emergency services,
Yeah.
or we
So
have
it would
state,
dep-
tribal, and federal or emergency services. And if we have an emergency service provider that is none of those, which one is it? Does that make sense?
So we, in these roles, have identified under the definitions section, we define emergency services as meaning the primary use of the communication site facility is for local 911 emergency medical services, wildfire, radio communications facilities, wildfire detection cameras, or law enforcement services and emergency alert systems. It does not include commercial wireless cellular facilities.
So
Yeah,
let's talk
so-
about wildfire for a second.
Mhm.
If we're talking about wildfire cameras, which one is that?
It would depend on the entity that installed the camera. So if it was, Department of Forestry, Oregon Department of Forestry, they would fit under the state category.
And
And
is
if
that,
it was
I'm not,
BLM,
fam-
it would be under federal.
I'm not familiar with how the system works. Is wildfire detection only done by a government entity?
We do have some like quasi-government forest protection associations. And so that would be, but they are basically run through Department of Forestry. So that would be at the state level.
Okay, so it's fine then. If there are no non-government agencies, then I'm fine with the way it reads as it is.
Yeah, so the FirstNet would be provided by a cellular provider. And if the lessee is a cellular provider, then they would be charged the cellular rate. Okay, so
Hey, Amber,
yes,
Stephanie has a question in the chat that I'll be glad to read out here in just a moment, but I also wanted to welcome Chip. Chip, we'd already I think had momentum going before you jumped on, and I didn't want to interrupt the flow too much. So welcome. We did notice that you're here, so thank you for that. Stephanie's question is, our small commercial internet provider is a colo. So is their rate $4,000 or $1,000 per year?
So co-locators, we kept at 25%. Let me share table 3. I know. Okay, so table 3. So here, this annual base rent, this is in our proposed everything that we're talking about today. So co-locators for commercial are right here. So yeah, so co-location fees are essentially 25% of the base rate, unless we're talking about a cellular co-locator, which we'll get to in a minute. So the co-locator on Harney County's tower would be $1,000 a year, and that seemed to be pretty fair, we thought. So as far as the rate changes in the commercial rates, which are, oops, in this column here, is there any questions, further questions about that?
Okay, Stephanie just replied that she's at 3,000 base rate.
The commercial and non-commercial co-location, we put as 25% of the base rate.
Yeah, so so she's government though.
Mhm.
And so, but the co-locator would be charged fees based on the co-locator's use. So the co-locator is a commercial user, so they would be charged the commercial co-location fee.
Thank you for the clarification, Amber.
So I do talk about how we still see an overall loss in revenue in the commercial fees over 20 years. But that's just kind of unavoidable with the nature of most of them being small commercial and reducing our rates to reflect that. So the other rate change that we made is in the cellular category. So when we were looking at the rate study, and I can go back to that, the numbers were all over the place, but the low was around 4,000 and the high was 27,000. So looking at the 20-year projection at the rate that we were previously discussing, we weren't seeing numbers that showed much increase at all. We basically would stay level over 20 years, which didn't really make sense. And the cellular users, as far as we can tell, based on the payments we're receiving them, they're charging sublessees more than the lease fees that we are charging them. So $20,000 didn't seem to be out of line when you took that into account. The current structure we're using with sublease fees is the 25% cost share, and we're receiving sublessee fees in the amounts of $11,000 and $13,000, which means they're charging cellular sublessees, $50,000, $60,000 a year. And this is across all 3 cellular leases we have that have cellular sublessees. So it didn't make sense to not increase those fees. And then based on the sublease fees that we are receiving, since they are $10,000 and above, it seemed appropriate that the co-locator fee for sublessees would be 50%, which would start at $10,000. So if there's any comments about that. We're happy to hear
Chat box is still clear, Amber, so I think we're good on that. And then Stephanie wanted to drill down a little bit more in her scenario, but she'll do that later in the email so we can keep forging ahead.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, and that $20,000 is still 7,000 below what the high rate was in the rate study for cellular leases. So application fees. So one of the reasons that we weren't seeing any increased revenue over a 20-year period was cutting renewal application fees in half and then reducing the application fees for government. So that really didn't make a lot of sense when we started looking at the long term. So what were the changes we made? As far as application fees for government goes, we were going to keep those at the $750 that they are for a new lease. So any lease that's renewing, we did decide to keep the 50% of the normal application fee. So a renewal lease for government would still be $375. And those are all outlined in these columns here in table 3. So the government rate was one that we changed. The personal research scientific, that was bumped up a little bit from $250 to $375. And $375 is half of the fee we're charging now. So that seemed to still make sense. And then we put all the commercial application fees, and this is for a new lease, at $1,000. Co-locators would pay 50% of that, so they would pay $500. And then again, renewal application fees are half of what the original is, and cellular application fees are $2,000, and a cellular co-locator would be $1,000. Is there any questions about the adjustment in application fees?
Chat box is clear, Amber. And I don't see any hands at the moment.
Okay, we were hoping there wouldn't be too much heartburn because it's not a substantial change from what people are currently paying. So, all right, so with that, is there any other questions about tables 1, 2, or 3 that you had lingering before the meeting started?
Don't see any questions, Amber. I just wanted to say thanks too for that email that you packaged this up with earlier that helped. That was a good summary.
Yeah. Okay, well, anytime you have a question, let us know and we can jump to the draft. And then I believe we left off on co-locators. Okay. Zoom is officially not my favorite meeting platform. All right, I'm gonna scroll so don't get dizzy.
While you're getting there, I'm just going to go ahead and chime in and let everybody know that we're hoping to really plow through this today. So we do have one break set. You probably noticed on your agenda at 3:05, but we're hoping to keep everybody to our time commitment and end on time. However, if we're like super close to not having to justify a RAC number 4 and can plow ahead a little bit, we may ask that. We will do that if we can get enough folks on board, but we're not going to force the issue. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Do we need to go over the definitions we changed first? Did you all have a chance to review the definition changes that we just verbally went over? Were you able to look at them prior to the meeting?
So jumping into, we can,
Nope.
John,
Go for it.
I know you're shocked, right?
Yeah.
Number 24,
On which section? Where you at?
definitions.
Okay.
It just took me a while to get to my comments. Sorry. I did read them in advance.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, yeah.
So I suspect your DOJ lawyers would have thoughts on how to do this, but I don't know that there's a federally designated not-for-profit or nonprofit. My understanding of those are generally state law terms done by the local AG, not federal terms. Federal deals with tax exempt status, but they don't actually deal with nonprofit status, that's my understanding of how it goes. And so if my understanding is correct, then an entity that qualifies as a federally designated not-for-profit nonprofit is awkward language. So you might want to tag that to follow up with your attorneys to figure out how to best say that.
Okay, we've got plenty of note takers, so we'll highlight that. See if there's not a better way to say that. Is there anything else we can address in definitions?
I'm not seeing any hands or chats, Amber, and I just wanted to say, John, the actual hand raising actually works better for me than the real hand raise, so thanks for that, but I'm not telling anybody not to electronically raise their hand.
Sorry, I'm just messing with formatting. Okay, so we'll move on to section 170 then, co-location.
So in the last meeting, we kind of presented this new co-location strategy process in these rules, and I kind of just wanted to check in to see if anybody had some more time to digest that and if there was any further thoughts on it. And I guess one of the big concerns we had was not, I guess, getting in the way of the relationship between
Lessees and
lessees and sublessees, or lessees and co-locators. So does anybody have anything more on that? We kind of did make it through this section last time, but I just wanted to kind of revisit it real quick.
So I think the only substantial change we made was the co-location fees for a cellular sublessee would start at $10,000. Chip, can you weigh in on that? And as a reminder, the co-locators would have their own lease with the state. So that wouldn't, we would obviously want to make sure they have an agreement with the base lessee, but it wouldn't require the base lessee to pay the state, because the co-locator would do that through their lease, through their co-locator lease.
Normally, excuse me, normally in that situation, at least in the industry, how it plans out is that, in essence, that you're talking about the $10,000, right?
Yeah.
Yep. That would normally be, yes, two leases, one where there's a tower lease, one where there's a ground lease, where actually the carrier or subleasee would be actually getting separate ground space from you. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be negotiated within the same ground space / compound that the main anchor tenant or carrier has. Excuse me. But it's the pricing of that is always based on location and the market itself and where things are. 10,000 is a little steep depending on location. Normally on a ground space only, I really don't see things go above $1,000 per month. That's rare. So I don't think you're necessarily out of whack. It just needs to be clear that really what you're telling me is that the state would be getting a separate lease with the subleasee, And then they'd be getting another lease. Then, of course, the subleasee would be getting a lease with the person that owns and operates the tower. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So can you repeat that? You said $1,000 a month was,
That's rare. I mean, because I like, for example, Verizon, and I've worked with all of them, but Verizon does not let other carriers go inside their existing compound. And so what that means is now we're in a situation where actually the new carrier coming in to co-locate on that actual tower has to get a separate ground space and usually ground space and lease with DSL. And that's fine. I mean, it happens a lot, but I know that it's all based on location too. So as you get like, where I'm located on that one site down Steens Highway, it's an hour and a half south of Burns, super remote. So some traffic down there, but you would expect that might be a $500 to $600 a month type of lease for the ground space only. And as you get in towards a metro area, of course, that's going to change upward to some degree. And that just kind of depends on each carrier's matrix for location in the region and what their experience is with the leases they have existing in the history of them.
okay. So, all right, so that's obviously a different structure than what we're proposing.
Well, in this case, the way we have these rules set up, those would both be base lessees. They'd have their own ground space.
uh,
So it wouldn't even apply.
Yeah, so Chip, Sheena just pointed out the way that we've written this, the rules. Essentially, if you had a building or a structure that you owned on the ground, you would be considered a base lessee rather than a co-locator. So
Yeah, we call them. Yeah, that's right. And so in this, go ahead.
So if, let's say US Cellular wanted to co-locate on Verizon's tower, but Verizon made them build their own building, we would be charging them the way that we've structured it now. We would charge them a base lease fee, which is the $20,000 fee. But it's sounding like that might not be appropriate.
Yeah, you'd experience significant pushback on that because, US Cellular's wanting to co-locate on a Verizon tower, which might have cost Verizon, anywhere from $800 to $2 million. And so they're going to be charging, of course, US Cellular to be on their tower monthly. There could be a yearly rate. But now when you turn around and go down to a ground space and US Cellular, you're charging them $20,000. Well, that's in conjunction to the existing, what they're going to pay on the tower. Now, generally, US Cellular doesn't have any investment into it because they didn't build the tower. And so what I'm saying, I guess in that scenario, is US Cellular is going to be reluctant to want to go on Verizon's tower due to the base ground rent that is separate from the tower, but is strictly with DSL.
Okay, so maybe in the cellular case, we could adjust the definition for base lease and require the tower owner to be the base lessee.
Yeah, that works. I mean, it's just, yeah, I can see that working. It just has to be, and also language spelled out with your lease with Verizon, right? So all the cards are on the table. They know what's, because the jurisdiction is always going to, now here, Harney County, whoever the planning director in the planning department is always going to require co-location of at least, depending on the height of the tower, of at least 2 additional carriers. So there could be 2 additional carriers coming in, which is great. And that's actually good for DSL. And if they have to get separate ground space with DSL, awesome. It generally in those scenarios, that ground space is going to be actually worth more than if you were getting a revenue share, which was, say, going into Verizon's compound, everybody goes in there, and then they're paying Verizon X dollars to be on that tower. But part of those dollars is split out with the state, and hence revenue share, which we don't really see a lot of anymore. I see very little of it, though it's still out there to some degree, though minor. but it's
Yeah,
still
so-
viable.
So that was interesting when we were comparing our numbers to the actual sublessee fees that we're receiving from the bigger carriers.
Mhm.
And the structure right now is 25% revenue share. So the lessee pays us 25% of the rent that they've charged their sublessees.
Yep.
And for like T-Mobile or US Cellular, we're getting $13,000 a year. So that would be on your high end of $1,000 a month.
Yeah,
And that-
there's some side stuff going on there because, and this happens periodically between carriers and tower management companies. And they're gouging each other, so, it could be Verizon is not happy with ATC right now or SBA. And so they kind of play games back and forth monetarily with what rent is. And then they get angry at each other and they go to their separate corner, and there'll be some pouting about it for a while, but eventually they may come up with a new deal on their master lease agreement.
That explains some things.
That
Yeah.
actually really does explain some of the numbers we've
Yeah.
received over the years. What is going
Yeah,
on?
it's not really shared out there that much, but it's reality. And I
Okay.
see it. So a co-locator or somebody coming in to co-locate on an existing tower, yeah, it depends on the relationship between the carriers that are coming in, or maybe it's the tower management company that owns the tower, right?
Mhm.
And they're just wanting to gouge a little bit on the carrier, and not unheard of by any means. So it's just a matter of where do we find the happy middle ground within all that. At the same time, you don't want to push business away. Unless they just absolutely have to have that location, or else can they go somewhere else that still gives their coverage objectives and raise their own tower that's far enough away for the code that allows another tower to go in a similar area, but like I said, meets coverage objectives. So at the same time, we don't want to push business away from DSL, but it can happen depending upon pricing. I know all carriers are super sensitive about that, and they're all hyper vigilant, watching to see what the tower management companies do on their pricing. A lot of that stuff's going on right as we talk.
Mhm. Okay.
Thanks for the peek behind the curtain, Chip. That was pretty helpful.
Yeah, it kind of is a little one. I always find it interesting because you never know when it happens, and all of a sudden you're going, "Oh, we're not friendly with them right now."
Uh-huh.
We're inside acquisition. Where can we go that we can avoid them? And is it possible within the coverage objectives of the engineers?
So, thank you, Chip. Stephanie, I know you have a lot of sublessees. Do you have any further thoughts on co-location in this process and how that will work?
She actually has a question in the chat.
Oh, perfect.
I'll read it out loud, and it's a fun scenario, it sounds like. We have a question about colo leases. Say we kick out a lessee out of our building, but they have the lease signed with DSL instead of us. I was in favor of DSL handling individually with the co-locators because it saved me, I scrolled too fast, I lost my spot. It saved me an administrative headache, but my boss reminded me that we still have the keys to the building and want to keep the authority over the space. I guess I don't see a provision for how DSL will handle terminations of the lease between the base lessee and the co-locator, but I may not be looking in the right place.
So
On number 8, you're right. Actually, this is a scenario that we didn't address. We addressed it in lease in number 8 as if the base lease is terminated, a co-locator lessee may be offered the option.
but don't we address that they have to provide proof of an agreement with the base lessee? Do we have that anywhere?
Okay, so we need to add something that addresses this situation.
Yep. Thanks for sharing that, Stephanie. We'll
Yeah.
brainstorm on it. She didn't want credit for bringing that up.
No, that's an excellent point. Thank you. We definitely overlooked that.
Yeah, well, and yeah, it seems like so obvious because we do require copies of agreements. So I would say that the base lessee should definitely keep the keys to the building, and if that agreement was terminated, then DSL would be in the position of following suit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we would follow suit.
Okay, and so that's something we need to address in our co-locator lease template. So base lessee notifies.
Sorry, we're taking notes.
This is why we have these RAC meetings, because we can't think of everything.
Although we tried. Okay, did anybody have any more points on the co-location thing? This is gonna be a new deal, so hopefully it works.
I'm not seeing any hands up, Sheena, or chat comments.
Okay, well,
Let me add
anybody-
one thing, Sheena. It's Chip.
Please.
Now, just thinking of, it's something to think about. Do you want to have, a carrier like AT&T on Steens Mountain that we're doing? They'll come in, have their lease area, which will accommodate their equipment and the tower. But it might be a good idea to have that separate ground space that we talked earlier. And there can even be language in, like on number 8 said, where for some folks, it's administrative nightmares if the lease is gone from somebody, say the base leasee, and they go away. I'm pretty sure there was a situation like that a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, at USFS south of Bend. And there was a location there that the main carrier that started the whole thing, it was their tower, bailed out. I don't remember the reasons. And there were at least two, I think there were 2, if not 3 other carriers co-located as subleasees, subtenants. And it was structured in such a way, in talking to the Forest Service rep, that they actually opened it up to kind of a bidding process of who wants it, but kind of a bidding process, and offers were thrown out and somebody won the bid. They stayed on the tower, but they became the main position and inherited what the language was essentially in the lease from the former base leasee. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of what we have proposed here.
Okay, and that's you don't see it very often, but it happens.
Mhm.
Right, that's kind of what we proposed in number 8.
Okay,
Was
8B.
8B, yeah.
okay, good.
So,
No, just
yeah.
wanted to, good to hash it out.
Competitive. Yeah, no, that's great input. Thanks. So we appreciate the real life examples because that's what we run into.
All good.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we can move on to lease modifications. Super exciting. So basically, we are going to require, we currently do this anyways, this is just kind of codifying it in the rule. That if an entity or a user of the site is needing to do an equipment upgrade or replacement that results in a change of frequency or a proposed ground disturbing activity, or there's going to be a change to the existing lease area, either in footprint or in tower height change, if it's going to get taller, if they're going to rebuild a tower and make it taller, we require a lease modification, and that is going to result in an amendment to the lease because it might adjust the lease area or what have you. And this is basically the process here that we would go through. It's actually currently what we do anyways. Like I said, this is just codifying it. We would like it to be on a application form. There is application fees there for it. So everything non-commercial, so that would include government, personal use, nonprofits. A modification would be $250. Commercial use modification application, 500, and cellular would be just 1,000. Lease modifications are subject to a review process. And especially if it's going to be frequencies, we want to, at a minimum, make sure that the frequencies aren't going to cause interference. The new frequencies aren't going to cause any interference. And if there's going to be a change to the footprint in the lease area, that it is going to be required to go through the local zoning ordinance. So a county signature will still be required for those things. But if it's just frequencies, the county doesn't regulate that. So those won't require a signature from the county on the application. So that's kind of how we're proposing to handle the lease modifications. Can anybody see any pitfalls with that or have any questions there?
Well, the only thing would be in leases within carriers from carrier to carrier is just language that if it's like for like, not simply changing, the size, but it's just upgrading the equipment. There usually is not a fee associated with that piece of equipment and upgrading, which would increase the rent. But if you're adding equipment, for sure.
So I'll give you a recent example, Chip. Verizon on Steens Mountain wanted to modernize their equipment. And so they wanted to take off old antennas, put new ones up, and that was going to result in a change of frequency. They weren't going to do anything with the tower, which is just a pole. So they were just going to keep the pole as it was, switch out old antennas and put new ones. But because we've identified a change in frequency as something that needs a modification, they did have to apply and notify us of that project. The only fee is the application fee. But if it's just replacing equipment for equipment with no change in frequencies or size, then that's covered in the lease.
Yeah, frequencies is a gray area because all the carriers, when you have multiple carriers in a location, whether it's on one tower and they're three stacked, or if there's 2 or 3 towers, like on top of Steens Mountain, there's multiple towers. If I remember right, it's been a while since I've been up there. You want to make sure that, yes, the carriers all want to make sure in their own best interest that their frequencies are not interfering with anybody else's. So that's usually handled internally via carriers, one carrier to another. And yeah, the carrier, as far as modification and charging a fee, if all the equipment is staying the same, except for maybe upgraded, but they're not increasing the load on the tower, which would require a structural analysis. Because they're adding equipment, or maybe the new equipment is actually significantly heavier than the old, may trigger a structural analysis. The frequency one, if you're basing it just on that alone, is a little thin, because they all take care to make sure, and it needs to be in the language anyway. It's in all the leases about frequencies and interference, because that's a big deal. But you really rarely encounter that as a problem between carriers on same or adjacent towers. It's essentially our engineers know what they're doing, and they ensure that nobody's interfering with their signals. And there's internal ways of handling that between carriers if that does happen. But I've not really seen that very much. But as far as looping it in, as far as a new $1,000 application fee, I don't know. Maybe that's not unreasonable, but I don't see it ever based on just that criteria. But it's at least my take on it, my experience.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less of an issue with cellular too than with other types of communication, but if you think traditionally like VHF or FM signal or something, how easy it is for somebody else to interfere with somebody else's signal. Essentially, this is meant to protect all the lessees so somebody else doesn't come in and start interfering with the effectiveness of your operation by their operation.
Yeah, and that was a question I wanted to ask if anybody has knowledge, is maybe the county or something on, different like radio or other types of frequencies used, because we did in the past have a couple complaints about frequency interference, and it was from smaller users that were not cellular. So I'm wondering if anybody has examples of how they've encountered interference. Or if it's been an issue.
It has been an issue for us many years ago, and then we started requiring these PRPs, basically these review periods amongst the lessees on a site to identify where there was going to be, and when there was changes to existing equipment that resulted in a frequency change, which is kind of why we started doing it in practice years ago. As a result of that, and I don't recall any, since we've started doing the review period amongst the lessees and requiring that when there was a frequency change or when there was a new application, we haven't had any problems with that. But I remember back like 10 years ago, we had a big to-do about it with lessees. So that was partly why this has been a practice for a while now.
Stephanie, have you or any of your sublessees encountered issues with interference?
She used the chat to say no.
Okay. Okay, John, it looks like you've got a question.
Yes, thank you. I'm reading this and I want to know what your interpretation of is. Is it equipment upgrade that results in a change in frequency, or is it equipment upgrade or a replacement that results in a change in frequency? So does result in a change in frequency refer to both equipment upgrade or replacement, or just replacement?
Both.
So do we need a comma somewhere?
I think you need a comma after replacement, but that's not really my strength. But I did want to clarify the interpretation. So I'm happy with that interpretation.
Oop. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, and I do want to point out that the review for these modification applications, and like in the case that it's just a frequency, is like it's 2 weeks. It just goes to the current lessees at the site. We do always send notices to the FCC. Rhonda clarified that today.
And actually, if it's a tower height increase, we would definitely want
County. Oh, that's right.
we would actually notify, especially in Harney County, we would notify the Department of Defense or FAA for tower height increases, just to make sure we're not interfering with flight areas.
Chip, is that something the companies have to do when they're proposing to build a tower?
Yes, in this scenario, for example, say Verizon's going in to co-locate on an ATC tower. What we see a lot of now, and it's been around for 9 years, but they're applying section 6409, the code from the FCC. And that means that there's a shot clock for the local jurisdiction to review and approve the extension and essentially have to grant it. So, which was quite surprising, because it's kind of like the federal government gave the carriers a freebie to go ahead and extend 20 feet. It's a little bit higher than that. There's technicalities to it, but not much. A 20-foot extension of that tower. And of course, the carrier that's coming in this case, what did I say? It was Verizon going to ATC. Verizon would be actually paying for that extension. And the cost would be out of their pocket, unless there was another co-locator that's going to co-locate on that same 20-foot extension. And
So, but the section 6409, so the local jurisdiction, so that would be like the county planning department?
Yeah, for our example, for Stevens Highway, that's Malheur County. And they, in all counties, I mean, they're whatever the jurisdiction is, there's federal guidelines for approval that they have. I can't remember the days since I'm no longer doing land use, so, but it's been around about 9 years. And we have to go through FAA, the ODA, everything has to go through the process of a higher height. It's just the differences with the local jurisdiction and their shot clocks and how it's all structured. And as I said, generally, the new carrier that's going to extend it will go on the top of the tower. But 6409 is an interesting law. And we see it all the time.
Okay.
And that, when we're done there, Stephanie brings up a good question too, I'd like to share from the chat.
Do you have any more questions?
Actually, I was already looking into Stephanie's question.
Oh, okay.
And back to co-location real quick. Number 4 under co-location says the term of a co-location lease will be determined by the department and may be subject to termination or renewal coinciding with the termination of renewal of the base lease the co-locator is occupying. Does that answer your question? So in practice, we would likely take a look at the agreement between the base lessee and the co-locator and make the determination on term based of that.
So Stephanie asked a follow-up question, which I think the answer is no. I see she's referring more to her. I assume she's talking about her lease with the sublessee. So she's looking for guidance on what lease kind of sets the term, and that would be our lease with the primary lessee.
The base lease would set the term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if we gave you 10 years with a subsequent 10-year renewal, then the co-locators would renew at the same time that the base lease would.
So everybody will be in sync. And she gives a thumbs up. She got that. So thank you for that extra explanation.
Okay. Was there anything else on modifications, folks? All right, moving on. Assignments. Your lease has to be in good standing to be assignable. This means like your bills are paid and we haven't had to issue default notices or we haven't had any problems with anything else, any other aspect of it. There's basically a form that's provided by us that you guys would have to fill out and a non-refundable assignment processing fee. 250 for non-commercial, 500 for commercial, and 1,000 for cellular. And we may request additional information concerning the proposed assignment. So again, this is something that is already done in practice that we're codifying.
Yeah, additional information would be like proof of purchase or a merger happening or something like that.
Yeah, we would require, you know, like basically the proof of that you're legal to do business in the state of Oregon, things like that. So is there any questions there? For anybody that's gone through an assignment, this should look fairly familiar.
Looks fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, normally just one thing on the cellular communication side is $1,000. In the private sector, you generally don't see that on an assignment, you know, as a fee going to the ground landlord. But it doesn't concern me that much.
Insurance. Super fun stuff.
And I don't think we changed this much from the rules that we took these from, right?
Not much at all, no. So we require insurance for each and every facility. Previously, it's been, what is that, limited liability or comprehensive or something, which is basically slips, trips, and falls.
General liability.
General liability is what it's called. So obviously that doesn't do much. So moving forward, we took this language from another set of rules that has been recently adopted. And this is where the agency is kind of going with insurance. And that is that we are utilizing the risk management division of DAS, which is the Department of Administrative Services, to determine the appropriate amount and type of insurance policies based on the user. So these are going to be insurance requirements aren't going to be blanket anymore. It's going to be for the site. And part of the reason for that is, you know, a ham radio obviously is just a tower, maybe a couple of guy wires, no big deal. But a cell site, cellular, has, you know, propane tanks and maybe some other hazardous materials with batteries. And one of our concerns is that, you know, a wildfire comes through there and hazardous materials somehow, you know, get burned up, something like that, or, you know, somebody's out there shooting or something and blows something up.
Shoots the propane tank.
Shoots the propane tank. You know, hopefully that never happens, but just on the in case, we want to have some insurance that's appropriate for each use. So number 3 kind of gets into the bonds. That's the insurance part of that. And number 3 gets into the bonds, where we may require that the holder of a ComSite facility authorization obtain a surety bond or certificate deposit, which names the state of Oregon as co-owner. And part of this is in the instance of decommissioning. Thank you. I was looking at it and couldn't say it. Just in case, you know, there's like a termination or there's new construction on the site and something goes wrong. The department has recently had a fairly public instance where something has gone very wrong and there was no bond, no insurance, no nothing. And so now we are changing that. So those may be requirements. One of the big things too is on number 4 is that the leaseholder will ensure that the Department of State Lands and the applicable authorization numbers are listed as additional insured under any and all insurance policies required for the authorization. These provisions don't apply to government entities who are self-insured, like the state, federal government. Oh gosh, there's a lot more. And then we may, at our discretion, require a decommissioning plan in the event of termination. And part of this, Chip, we added, I think it was Chip that suggested this, adding the language due to end of life of structures and buildings. So in that case, we would require a decommissioning plan, which would basically just say, this is our plan. It's going to be a cost estimate of the decommissioning work, timeline, and we're also requiring that that plan be basically created and submitted by a person qualified to do those things. Is there any questions thus far? I'm not watching the chat or anything, so.
There's no hands and no comments, Sheena.
Okay, thank you.
That type of person is hard to find in Harney County.
Yes.
This is a new requirement.
Yes, this is a new
Yes.
requirement.
Yeah, and I will say that it's the department may at its discretion. So this isn't a blanket statement that applies to every lease that we have. And I would see this being necessary, you know, for some bigger users. We've had towers that have been abandoned before and they were left for several years before they were in fact taken down, which definitely became a hazard. So we tend to address these types of things depending on the lessee and depending on the size of use. You know, if we have a lessee that's in good standing, that we have a decent relationship with, you know, we don't typically have to resort to things like this. But if we're going to talk about a 180-foot tower that has, you know, 200 square feet of cement poured and, you know, brick buildings and propane tanks, that's probably enough of an impact that we want to see a plan to see that removed and the land returned to its prior condition, or, you know, the lease would get sold. So
John,
Presumably that's a condition of a lease already for someone that has a tower that has that sort of impact.
not to this extent with a decommissioning plan.
So would this requirement apply to existing leases as well?
It could, at the
Yeah.
department's discretion. So that's kind of,
And this is really kind of a fail-safe for us when there's bad actors involved.
Sure. I understand that, but 5 years from now, we might be talking to a different set of employees at the Department of State Lands because everyone there has gone on to bigger and better things, right? So intents can change over time, right? I would worry about negotiating a lease before this regulation came into effect, going through all the analysis of whether it makes sense to make this investment, what the end of life of this investment is going to be, because presumably some of your more sophisticated lessors or lessees actually go through that analysis, and then being hit with a rather extensive decommissioning plan requirement that changes that analysis significantly.
Yeah. So as you can see in number 6, the rationale for us doing it would be an event of termination, which means we are terminating the lease anyways, or it's by default, which then leads to termination anyways, termination. And then the decision not to renew. So
it's basically the lessee notifying us, well, they're either in default, they've decided not to renew their lease, or they've decided they no longer want to be a lessee. We would say at that point, you need to tell us how you're going to remove these structures if you are not going to assign the lease to somebody else.
I completely understand the rationale. You don't want to be stuck with a site that has a bunch of old windmills on it that are falling apart. I get it. I'm not unsympathetic to the rationale or the reasoning for it, but it occurs to me that that sort of plan that could require an extensive outlay of cash by your lessee who is about to become a former lessee probably should have been negotiated in the initial lease, and to come after him after the fact, to me, seems to be a not holding up the end of the bargain that was made when the lease was originally signed.
Yeah, and this is something we can address in new lease language when we take our lease templates to our attorneys. And it could potentially be as simple as a checkbox in this lease requires a decommissioning plan, and then outline what that would entail. But
I'm totally on board with it being upfront. But what I don't like is you've had a deal, and I went and looked at our deal to see what the context was, and it has some language about removal, but it doesn't have anything about putting together a decommissioning plan, which is an expense all of by itself, and it doesn't have anything about things that might be included in a decommissioning plan that are not included in your current template lease, such as ground remediation.
right.
Those could be huge expenses that probably should have been handled at the time of negotiation, and to hit them up in a regulation after the fact, to me, seems bitter, I guess.
So in this case, like your lease, because you're an existing lessee, the lease takes precedent over the rule. Does that make sense? Because the lease is the contract for us, and that's how we do it. We go to the lease first. If the lease is silent, we go to the rule. And that's kind of how you do things. Our new lease templates will say something to the effect of a decommissioning plan may be required.
Sure. Yes. And
Yeah.
I understand I'm just kicking that can down the road, hopefully 20 years or whatever. Right. But that's
Yeah.
that's going to be some other lawyer's problem to deal with. Hopefully that one is not mine to deal with. Right.
Nor mine.
So
Thank
I'm
you,
happy
John.
to kick that one far down the road.
Okay.
And I appreciate that that the lease would control over the new reg. Is there a place that I can find that, either that is an explicit department policy somewhere?
You know,
'Cause I'm pretty sure if I go to court with Sheena said, that's probably not going to go that far, right?
My word is good. You can take that.
I'm sure it is. I have no doubt about it.
I get the feeling John's about to bail out on us here.
He's gonna stir the pot and take off. I get it.
That's right. I've got 18 minutes. I've got to fill them.
Well, I didn't mean that. I meant that he was gonna pull his sight. Like, I'm out of here before
I will tell you that we have sites all over the state and some in Southwest Washington, and there have been a number of older leases that haven't, where the lessor hasn't been sophisticated enough or smart enough to talk about making a substantial decommissioning plan, and now they want to do that after the fact, and that causes a real economic analysis about whether we're still going to be at the site and whether we're willing to adopt that particular obligation when we don't have it.
Mm,
So
I think-
this is an issue that's going to come up for a lot of legacy
Mhm.
lessees that you have.
Yeah, I agree, and I get your point, John. I think this will be a thing that we bring up in our next discussion with the DOJ too, is that we're not expecting to impose new conditions on a lease, just like we wouldn't change the lease rates on somebody tomorrow. If the new rules go into effect, we would honor the lease, but we'll make sure that we're not, throwing out a net that's catching people unawares that didn't agree to this in their lease negotiation.
I've been taught that's the good deal, bad deal, a deal is a deal rule, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, we would definitely honor the contract language that we have in place. So we've definitely got that noted. The decommissioning plans need to be negotiated at the time a lease is entered into. So we will.
And for the purpose of the note, Stephanie seconded John's comments on that.
Okay, yeah, definitely see what you're saying. So moving on, is that all decommissioning plans must be approved in writing by the department prior to engaging in the decommissioning work. And the leaseholder is required to provide notice to the department in writing 60 calendar days in advance of implementing the decommissioning plan. At that time, the surety bond or other financial instrument must be in place and submitted to the department. And the leaseholder must demonstrate to the department that the decommissioning work has been completed to allow the department to release the surety or other financial instrument.
So
So
we would,
that's,
we would have to make those requirements in the lease.
yeah. So those would definitely be in a new lease template. How they apply, if they apply to current lessees, we need to discuss that with DOJ.
Could we get some input on bonding? Do any of you guys have experience with paying bonds for a communication site?
I don't for me, this is Chip, just because that would be a different department than me.
No bonds. Okay. Yeah, bonds tend to be COI. Okay, so insurance. Yeah, bonds tend to be for construction, really big impact activities. The only thing I can think of right now that the department's dealing with is like the Facebook cable in the
That's what I was talking
territorial
about.
sea. So that doesn't apply to us at all. But it is something that's addressed in every set of rules we have. So if it's something the department needs to acquire, those are in all of our rules. And per the suggestions, we will make sure those requirements are outlined in the lease at the time of negotiation. Okay, any last comments on that section? We're getting pretty close.
Since we're between sections, I'll just let everybody know the time check that we have 15 minutes till we're offering the break. And I think at 3 is when we lose John. So just sharing those notes for everybody.
Yeah. I think we're looking pretty good. So
Competitive bidding process. This is fairly standard language and has been for years. So this is the competitive bidding process that we've talked about a couple times throughout these rules. This is where it's specifically defined. So bottom line is that If we, and this has never, to my knowledge, happened for communication sites or communication site leases ever. If we receive like 2 applications for the same site, for the same use, right, like on top of each other, then we would end up, it would trigger this competitive bidding process if both are qualified applicants. The other way this would get triggered is if the department wants to lease out an area. Say we have a hilltop that we would like to start putting towers on. We would then like basically advertise as a lease available. And that would trigger this as well to try to get folks interested in leasing that site. Yeah, this is hard to read.
It's getting dark.
It's, so the department will determine on a case-by-case basis if an area requested for lease will be offered to the public through competitive bidding. It's kind of what I just talked about. Whether it's available for use, if it's trust or non-trust land, the nature of the use and the length of the authorization requested, and whether the applications received to the department to use the same area requested for same or competing uses. Once we get through those steps, we will essentially give a notice of lease available to provide applications, provide opportunity for applications to be submitted within a certain time frame. The notice is going to state the location and size of subject area, the use approved for the subject area, and the type of auction or minimum acceptable bid amount. Oh, thank you. There's more hands. What developments, if any, must applicant must install, construct, or purchase, or what is there and maybe needs to purchase from an existing lessee. We would notice a deadline for completing a completed application, for submitting a completed application. The notice would be not published less than once each week for 2 successive. Oh my gosh, I cannot talk today. I apologize. Once each week for 2 successive weeks in a newspaper of general circulation. We would also post it on the website, and we would give notice to adjacent landowners. And we would send it to interested parties. The highest qualified bidder would be awarded the lease, and on parcels for which no application has been received, the department may offer to the public through this competitive bidding process. So this is actually really standard language. It's in all of our rules. Does anybody have any thoughts on this other than the random extra ands that we need to get rid of?
I will say the only reason I could see this being applied is if a site ran out of space or a county wasn't going to permit another cell tower and we had multiple applications. We've not run into that so far. The most common, I guess, scenario we've used the competitive bidding on is when we have rangeland available for lease and we have multiple lessees competing for the lease area. But communication sites, it's
Never happened.
yeah, I don't
We use this
see this
basically
being
with
necessary.
the grazing, rangeland grazing stuff, and that's about it. Does anybody have heartburn somewhere on this? Okay.
Okay, if we don't have any comments, we'll just keep moving on and we're getting pretty close. So termination of communication site facility lease for default. This is all very standard. We haven't changed this from the set of rules that this originated from. So if you fail to comply with the rules or the terms and conditions of the lease or violate laws governing the use of the authorized area, We would notify the holder of the lease in writing of a default and may provide opportunity for correction within a specified time frame. If the leaseholder fails to correct the default within the time frame specified, the department may modify or terminate the lease and take appropriate legal action. If the leaseholder fails to remove structures, buildings, and equipment upon termination of the lease, those structures, buildings, and equipment may become property of the department at the discretion of the department. And I know that is specifically addressed in lease language, and that has come up as an issue before. So we have a comment. Curious how you would, back on competitive bidding.
John, we would probably try to find space for both applicants. Just as an FYI.
Yeah. I don't see it really being an issue on communication sites.
Oh, we got a thumbs up.
And Aaron, for your notes, that was to address John's comments in the chat. How would you address competitive bid on non-commercial versus cellular applicants for the same space? And we really just don't see that being an issue so far. We would try to accommodate both requests. I think the only issue that I could see competitive bidding coming into play is when you have two large-scale cellular lessees, which I understand have a requirement. If you put one tower up, you have to allow co-locators. So if you had competing entities that wanted to build towers and the county was only permitting one tower, that's basically the only scenario I could imagine. Okay, do we have questions on default?
For termination.
So if you fail to remove structures and equipment, it essentially becomes property of the state. So, and we typically don't have a lot of default situations. Enforcement and civil penalties. So if we have a violation of your authorization, which is your lease, or there's unauthorized use of state land, so the director can determine if that conforms with the use of a communication sites facilities lease, or if it's not authorized. So this is basically up to the director. To basically determine if a violation has occurred, if the use that's occurring is not allowed through the lease or through the authorization type.
Or if there's a use occurring that doesn't have a lease or authorization.
Yeah, so basically, so if somebody goes up and sets up a pole for radio communications and we haven't authorized it, that would definitely be considered a trespass and could be subject to civil penalties or other remedies. So upon determination that a violation of the communication sites facilities authorization or lease has occurred, or that an unauthorized use of state lands has occurred, the director may exercise the remedies set forth in the lease, any other remedies available at law, or impose civil penalties consistent with section 210.
So Stephanie, we typically don't notify prior to doing any kind of inspection, and that's mostly because it's never really planned. It's like, oh, I have 2 hours, I can make it up to Burns View while I'm here and just check things out. I think the only planned inspection we ever make is the one to the Steens, because it's a haul to get out there. So
Is that this citation a typo? It says below, but 210 would be above.
Yes, that's a typo.
Should it be 240?
Probably. Highlight it.
Ooh, we're almost done.
Highlight it to say verify. I thought I caught all of those citations, but I might have missed it. Stephanie, if somebody like on Burns View, if one of you guys call us and say, hey, there's this rogue tower that's being built, what's going on? We would go out and check it out.
Yeah, I mean, it could come through a site inspection. It could be reported. It could be, you know, observed and reported. So it's not necessarily tied to a suspected violation or alleged unauthorized use.
No.
We would verify first.
Yeah, like if we got a phone call that said something was going on, we'd go check it out. Or if we saw something up there that looked weird to us and wasn't, you know, we would come back and check everybody's, you know, use areas and be like, okay, that tower is outside of any use area. We'd start making phone calls and try to figure out who the tower belonged to or who the equipment belonged to and get it squared away that way first. So we would do some investigative work before, you know, going to straight to enforcement actions or something like that.
So number 4, the unauthorized use of state-owned land or the violation of an authorization granted under these rules constitutes a trespass pursuant ORS 273-185, 274-040, and the Oregon Constitution, Article 8, Section 5. So those are basically what gives us our authorities. The land board and its duties are identified in the Constitution, Article 8, Section 5. And then Chapter ORS 273, that's our state lands generally statutes. ORS 274 actually pertain to waterways, but we kept submerged and submersible language in these rules. So that's just kind of a backup there. In addition to any other penalty or sanction provided by law, the director may assess a civil penalty for the unauthorized use of state-owned land for the violation of an authorization granted under these rules as authorized in ORS 273-992 and 274-992. So those statutes give us an outline on how to proceed with civil penalties.
Is there any more questions on enforcement actions, civil penalties, and other remedies?
I just want to interrupt real quick because I think we're about to lose John. So John, if we don't meet again as a group, I just wanted to thank you in front of everybody too for participating very actively and appreciate that. That doesn't mean you'll not hear from us more. We'll definitely be sending a recap and next steps and possibly asking for input, but I just didn't want you to disappear without knowing that we appreciated your participation in the 3 RACs.
Thank you very much. In fact, I was just typing a comment, but since you gave me the opening, I'm going to use it. It's quicker anyways. I may not have agreed with all the choices that have been made, but I can see where they come from. I can see they put a lot of thought has been put into this process and into how you got to where you are today. So thank you. I appreciate being a part of it, and thank you for your efforts in putting it together. I think it's at the end of the day, it's a good work product that the group can be proud of, and you should be. So thank you.
All right,
Thank
thanks,
you,
John.
John.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
See you in
John.
5 years.
Oh no, we'll be
before.
hitting you up for more rules.
All
Okay,
right, last section, guys. This is it.
we didn't have any comments on civil penalties, right? Let's see.
Let's see.
Reconsideration of decision, so. Okay, so I'm just gonna read these. An applicant for communication site facilities authorization or any other person adversely affected by the issuance or denial of a communication site facilities authorization on state-owned land may request the director or the land board, depending on which entity made the decision, reconsider the decision. Such a request must be received in writing by the director no later than 30 calendar days after the date of the delivery of a decision. So if your application is denied, you have 30 days to ask us to reconsider the decision. The director will review the request within 60 calendar days after the date of delivery of the request. If the director made the decision of concern, the director may affirm the decision, issue a new or modified decision, or request the applicant to submit additional information to support the appeal. Yeah, we have seen this happen before, and we would definitely probably be asking for more information. If the decision was made by the land board, the director may recommend to the land board either that the communication site facilities authorization issuance or denial be affirmed based on the merits of the request, or that the land board authorize initiation of a contested case proceeding. If the department recommends initiating a contested case proceeding, the department will select a hearing officer and proceed pursuant to ORS 183.413 and 183 through 183.470.
So this is very standard language in all of our rules, and I don't think it's deviated much over the years.
No.
Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this? Chip, did you have something here?
Nope.
Well, if there's nothing specific, I would like to open it up for any general comments or questions that might be lingering. We do hope this is an improvement from our current process, so we appreciate everybody taking the time to contribute to this.
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing us to participate. And we'll all miss John's comments. He's right on.
He thinks I was joking. I might be sending him stuff that has nothing to do with nothing to have him proofread for me.
I think that's a great idea, Chris. I was going to do the same.
He'd send us a bill.
Mhm.
Good point.
I'll pass it on to the carrier.
Okay,
well-
so I just want to check in with everybody. We've heard a lot from Stephanie. Gabe at ODOT, do you have anything you're curious about? Does this bring more heartburn, less heartburn?
No, this looks a lot like what we deal with all the time. No, you're looking really good.
All right,
Thank you.
let's see.
There's 2 chats.
Oh, chat messages. Cassie, thank you. It all sounds good to me. So Stephanie, before the colos, 25% was based on our base lease amount, which is 3,000. But now it's based on small commercial base lease category of 4,000. Yes, so it's based on the use that the co-locator is occupying the site for. Okay.
Are we unconfused, Stephanie?
No
We're-
worries.
We're kind of slow today too. Don't feel bad. Cassie, thank you. Steve?
I don't have anything else to add. I appreciate being involved in the process, and you guys have put a lot of extra work, and I just love the expertise you guys have. So thanks for including me.
Yeah, we appreciate a common school fund beneficiary being part of the process.
Definitely a learning experience for me.
Us too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lori isn't on here, is she?
No, I think that's everybody.
Nope.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for being part of this. Your expertise and comments have really helped us hopefully make a really good product, and hopefully, you know, in practice, it'll work out well for all parties.
Chris, do you have any
Absolutely.
last comments?
How could I sign off any better than that? I appreciate everyone's input for sure. And I really do feel like we're in a much better place with this, and we'll put some polish on it. And hopefully soon our agency will have a rules coordinator that helps to lead us through the next steps. But we'll keep people posted. And again, appreciate everybody's input and time. There was a lot of effort and a lot of work done between the meetings. And I just one last thank you to all the DSL staff that helped make this happen. Most up front were Sheena and Amber. Thank you both so much. And then again, behind the scenes, we've had Lonnie and Aaron's support. So yeah, thank you. I'm sorry that we skipped the break. Not really.
Well, we got it done. Okay, so Stephanie she would like to see the template drafts and provide input of applications and the like. So there will be, the templates are gonna have to go to DOJ. So we could, once we've got DOJ's eyes on them, we could probably share the draft. The applications are pretty standard. I think the only things that we plan on adding to the applications are additional requirements that are things we already asked for. So frequencies, site drawings, maybe proof of communication with the FCC, things of that nature. So the application really isn't going to change that much. But there will be some more process following this. So we will finalize our draft of the rules, and it will get submitted to our attorneys for their review and approval, at which point it goes out for public review.
We will have after we get a DOJ sign off on this, we will actually have a public hearing on these rules, which we would notify all of our lessees for. And we could probably notify you guys on the RAC if you're interested. Send an email to Chris and let him know so we can make sure you get notified for it. And that's where anybody can submit testimony basically through these public hearings. It'd probably be a virtual one would be my guess.
Mhm.
And then if we receive, we'll address substantive comments that we receive on the rules through the public hearing. Then I think we go back to DOJ in case we have some major changes there, or something crops up from the public hearings. And then it just goes through Secretary of State's process and then eventually becomes rule and we get to start using them. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell, as far as we know.
Made it sound easy, Sheena.
I know it's really not. There's a lot of things out there. And I know there's a lot of things I'm not saying.
Yeah. So these
That's the big
rules
things.
won't be in place until 2022.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a process and we've still got some process to go, but we appreciate everybody's help in the formation of the rules and the process.
Thank you,
Yep,
everybody. and
agreed.
Team
Thank
DSL,
you.
You did a great job.
Thank you, Chip.
Okay,
Yep.
I think we can let everybody
touch.
go.
All right. You guys all have a good day. Thank you for taking part.
Thanks, you too. Take care.